I've been the night watchman at this historic estate for going on 15 years now. It's an impressive place, with roots dating back to the 1700s when it was built and inhabited by one of the founding fathers who inked his name on the Declaration of Independence. These days it operates as a museum and event venue, carefully preserving the manor's antiquated charms for visitors. My role is to keep watch over the premises overnight, locking up, ensuring the artifacts are undisturbed, and monitoring the security systems. It's a job I've grown quite accustomed to over the years, perhaps a little too accustomed to the unexplained occurrences that tend to happen when the last tour groups have filtered out. Just yesterday, I began my nightly routine of turning out lights and double-checking the vacant rooms before settling in for the evening shift. As I made my way up the grand main staircase to the second floor, an unsettling chill ran down my spine. Ascending the creaky wooden steps, I heard the most unnerving sigh, so close it felt like someone's warm breath grazing the back of my neck. I spun around, my heart pounding, but of course there was no one there. This place has a way of playing tricks on you when you're the only living soul around. More times than I can count, I've heard what sounds like lively conversations drifting down the halls when I know I'm utterly alone. Just a few weeks ago, I could have sworn multiple voices were engaged in an animated discussion coming from one of the sitting rooms. The murmurs grew louder as I approached, sounding like a parlor scene from the manor's heyday. But when I pushed open the pocket doors, the room was empty, the antique furniture neatly undisturbed. The indistinct chatter instantly ceased the moment I entered. I slowly backed out, trying to shake off the eerie sense that I had interrupted some ghostly social gathering. On other nights, the voices have sounded more heated, intense whispers or even arguments that send shivers down my spine. I've followed the haunting echoes down long corridors, only for them to inexplicably fall silent just as I'm zeroing in on the source. It's unnerving to say the least, but whether the spirits here are engaged in friendly parlor talk or heated spectral disagreements, I've learned to keep my distance from those unseen conversations. I try to remind myself that whatever lingering spirits reside here seem more mischievous than malicious. In all my years, I've never felt threatened, just unnerved. Maybe it's the house's antique bones settling. Maybe it's something more. Either way, working the night shift in this centuries-old manor is not for the faint of heart. But I've grown used to the unexplained sights and sounds. They're just part of the job at this point. Most of the unexplained occurrences I've witnessed over the years have been relatively tame, if unsettling. Strange noises, objects moving on their own, that sort of thing. But there was one night burned into my memory that still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up whenever I recall it. It was a few years into my tenure as the night watchman. I was making my final rounds, checking that every door and window was secure. As I headed down the central hallway on the second floor, I noticed a faint flickering light spilling from beneath the closed door of the study. My initial thought was that I'd missed turning off a lamp in that room. I grabbed the cold brass doorknob and tried to open it, but it wouldn't move. It felt like something heavy was blocking it from the other side. Then I heard it, someone breathing heavily and in pain. It sounded like they were having a hard time, like they were a person in trouble. I felt scared thinking there might be an intruder or someone who needed help stuck inside. I pushed hard against the door, hitting my shoulder on the tough wood until it broke with a cracking sound. What I saw in the room stayed in my memory forever. The fireplace was on fire, flames moving wildly like they were blown by invisible winds. Books were all over the floor, pages flying around even though there was no wind. In the middle of all this chaos, an old wooden chair was rocking back and forth as if caught in a storm. I was very surprised and couldn't do anything at first. The chaos suddenly stopped, making the room quiet again. The chair didn't move and the fire was just glowing bits of wood. I wondered if what I saw was real or just my mind playing tricks because I was scared. Even now I'm not sure, but I haven't gone back to that room since then because I feel really scared for no clear reason. Ever since we were kids, my best friend Jamie and I have been inseparable. We grew up just a few houses apart and spent almost every waking hour together. His family was always warm and welcoming to me. I was practically another son to them. Jamie's aunt and uncle on his mom's side lived in an ancient house that had been in their family for generations. Built in the late 1800s, it was one of the earliest homes constructed in our town after it transformed from a sleepy rural village into a booming industrial center. According to local lore, the original owner was a wealthy but extremely unpleasant widow who had worked her staff of servants to the bone with cruel demand after cruel demand until her inevitable death. It was a stately old place with beautiful archaic architecture. But from the moment I first visited as a child, the house gave off an undeniably eerie vibe that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was just the antiquated design and decades of old timber and plaster, but something about it felt deeply unsettling. His aunt and uncle enthusiastically embraced the haunted mystique of their residence. They adored scaring us with tales about the spirit of a cantankerous old woman who had lived and died in that house over a century ago. According to their descriptions, the ghost appeared as a wizened elderly lady with a perpetual scowl on her wrinkled face. She wore an old-fashioned dress and shawl straight out of the Victorian era. But the most chilling detail was her transparent, ghostly legs, which faded into nothingness from the shins down, as if her feet didn't quite connect with the ground. Jamie and I always got a kick out of their spooky stories, but never fully bought into the idea of the home actually being haunted. That is, until the strange events of last summer. It was a sweltering July afternoon when Jamie and I were lounging at her place. His phone rang, and it was his aunt asking a peculiar favor. His aunt asked if we could stop by her house to check on some workers remodeling the kitchen. Apparently they had called saying something bizarre happened that spooked them enough to refuse going back inside. Intrigued, I joined my friend on the short trip over to his aunt and uncle's place. When we arrived, we found two burly contractors sitting on the porch, puffing nervously on cigarettes. The older man looked visibly shaken as he recounted their chilling experience. He said they were ripping up the kitchen floor when an inexplicable cold swept over the room despite the summer heat. Then they looked up to see the apparition of an old woman glaring at them disapprovingly. But this was no ordinary ghost. She was semi-transparent, her legs fading into nothingness from the shins down. Stunned, the two workers fled the house in terror, refusing to return unless accompanied. As the man described the spook's appearance, I realized it matched my friend's aunt and uncle's accounts to a T. In that moment, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. This was no longer a fanciful tale. We had faced the supernatural head-on. I don't think any of us would ever doubt the existence of that elderly specter again. Ever since we became best friends in third grade, his house felt like a second home to me. We spent countless nights having sleepovers, playing video games, and sharing our deepest secrets and wildest dreams. His parents treated me like another son, and his little sister always delighted in having her two big brothers around. This particular summer night was no different from all the rest. After gorging ourselves on pizza and soda, we set up the pull-out couch in his famously cool basement rec room to have our usual camped-out sleepover. As the youngest siblings, we relished having that underground lair all to ourselves after his parents and sister went to bed. We stayed up way later than we should have, building fairy tale kingdoms out of Legos and battling each other in marathon video game sessions, as the night grew later and later. Finally, well past 2 a.m., our heavy eyelids got the better of us. My friend groggily made his way upstairs to his bedroom, leaving me alone to settle in on the pull-out couch amid our haphazard basement kingdom. It was a warm, sticky night, but the low hum of the dehumidifier provided some white noise comfort as I lay there drifting off to sleep. Little did I know the terrible event that would shake me awake in a few short hours. The dim glow of the nightlight cast eerie shadows across the room as I felt my eyes growing heavy. Just as I began to slip into slumber, a sound jolted me fully awake. The unmistakable footsteps of someone slowly pacing across the cold stone floor. I shot upright, my heart pounding as I strained my eyes in the darkness. There was no one there, yet the footfalls continued, slowly making their way around the perimeter of the room. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the basement was supposed to be empty except for me. With each heavy step, my imagination ran wilder. Was it a burglar? A ghost? I wanted to call out, to demand whoever was there to reveal themselves. But my voice caught in my throat as panic took hold. The footsteps seemed to come closer, passing right by the end of the couch where I sat paralyzed. I clutched the blanket tightly, my knuckles turning white, and willed myself to stay perfectly still and silent. Then, as abruptly as they had started, the eerie footfalls ceased. An unnerving quietness settled over the basement once more. I remained frozen in fear for what felt like an eternity, listening intently for any other sound, scrutinizing every shadow. But the mysterious intruder, if that's what it was, had vanished as inexplicably as it had arrived. My racing heart eventually began to slow as the silence stretched on unbroken. Trying to convince myself it had just been my mind playing tricks, I shook my head and forced out a nervous chuckle. Don't be so childish, I thought. There's no such thing as ghosts or burglars who can walk through walls. Resolutely, I laid back down and pulled the covers up over my head, determined to put the strange incident behind me. Within minutes, the reassuring rasp of my friend's snoring from upstairs lulled me into an uneasy slumber. By morning, I had fully convinced myself it had all just been a dream. Or so I thought until a few weeks later when I found myself spending the night at his house again. Once more, we set up camp in the basement rec room, staying up late playing games and laughing at dumb jokes like we always did. As the night wore on, I started feeling a prickly uneasiness, the ghost of that odd night creeping back into my mind. Don't be ridiculous, I chided myself as I climbed into the pull-out couch while my friend turned out the lights. It was just a crazy dream, that's all. Yet no sooner had I drifted off to sleep than an all too familiar sound pierced the silence, the heavy plodding footsteps slowly traversing the stone floor. My eyes snapped open as icy dread washed over me. It was happening again. The footfalls methodically circled the room as I lay there petrified, the blankets clutched tightly around me. I could hear my own ragged breathing, desperately trying to stay quiet and still as the unseen presence passed by. Part of me was tempted to wake my friend up, but the larger part was paralyzed by inexplicable fear. Then, as suddenly as they began, the eerie footsteps stopped. I strained my ears in the ringing silence, but whatever specter had visited could no longer be heard. Shaking, I pulled the covers over my head and clamped my eyes shut, hoping that when I opened them again, it would turn out to be another dream. But I knew it wasn't. Something unexplained was happening in this basement, and I had experienced it twice now. The next morning, I could hardly keep my eyes open from the restless night of terror. My friend noticed how shaken I seemed as we groggily got ready for school. "Hey man, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost or something," he said with a yawn. I paused, wondering if I should confide in him about the inexplicable events of the night before. Taking a deep breath, I decided to finally come clean. "Actually, I think I might have," I admitted hesitantly. "Those weird footstep noises I heard last time, they happened again while you were asleep upstairs." To my surprise, his eyes went wide with sudden realization. "Oh man, I never told you what my parents said about this basement, did I?" My heart skipped a beat as he let that ominous preamble hang in the air. He then recounted the harrowing story his parents had shared after they first moved into this house. Apparently, the previous owners had been a married couple who endured a bitter, toxic relationship. One night after a blowout fight, the husband snapped and brutally murdered his wife, down in this very basement. Overcome with regret and horror at what he had done, he then took his own life as well. "My parents didn't want to scare us, but they've always suspected the basement is haunted by the spirits of that poor couple," my friend said solemnly. "I thought it was just a crazy story until now." The blood drained from my face as I put the pieces together. Those slow, plodding footsteps I had heard not once but twice were the lingering manifestation of that tragedy. An involuntary shudder ran down my spine. No wonder the presence had felt so menacing, so dreadful. We had been sharing our basement sleepovers with a pair of trapped, restless souls,